Chapter 8, the Market Revolution. Between the War of 1812 and the United States Civil War, the United States became an industrialized nation. Advances in transportation and communications, the growth of manufacturing technology, the development of new systems of business organization, and population growth all drove our rapid industrial expansion, widening the gap between the united Northeast and the Northwest, and the culturally and economically isolated American South. Now, a global revolution in advanced machine technology would grip the United States and much of the globe, called the Industrial Revolution only in retrospect. The American Eli Whitney's Cotton engine is the principal American development of the era. Here's Eli Whitney and his concept of interchangeable parts. His cotton gin made cotton harvesters roughly 8 times more effective. And thus, the institution of slavery was emboldened in the United States. A withering institution was now emboldened. And it came to grip the South and the Southwest even more tightly in these new decades. Places where growing cotton had been too expensive now attracted investment as a result of these cost-saving measures and the development of new plantations relying on still more slaves across the West. Notably, Eli Whitney's machine also helped introduce the concept of interchangeable parts to U.S. designers and manufacturers, which would bring down costs and make things easier to repair. From its revolutionary beginnings until the 1820s, Americans relied on roads for internal transportation. Beginning in the third decade of the 19th century, the 1820s, Americans turned to their waterways and to canals to connect up and stitch together their expanding nation. In the previous turnpike era of roads, corn and wheat from northwestern farmers and the cotton and tobacco of southwestern planters had to be carried overland to the Mississippi River and then barged down to New Orleans, where ocean-going ships eventually took the cargo out of the Gulf of Mexico and then took it all the way up to eastern ports or abroad. The travel was difficult, time-consuming, and expensive, and the movement of goods over water promised faster and frictionless travel. The engineering challenges of canal building were significant, and the financing fell largely to the states. New York began the Erie Canal in 1817, the Erie Canal. And it was the greatest construction project Americans had ever undertaken. It was a simple ditch, and it still exists. It was a ditch 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep. But the route required hundreds of difficult cuts and fills to enable the canal to pass through hills and over valleys, stone aqueducts to carry water, and 88 locks with heavy masonry to permit ascents and descents in elevation. 8 years later, that canal connected New York to Chicago by waterway, and within 7 years, toll traffic was so heavy that the canal had paid for itself. Using expanded inland waterways connected by new canals, New York was soon connected to New Orleans. Dragged with little resistance by small teams of horses on the banks, crops could move on these waterways east, and manufactured goods could move west at unprecedented speeds, evolving agricultural markets and expanding patterns of immigration and settlement across the United States. Other cities on the eastern seaboard lacked access to the waterways of New York, but industrial leaders began to imagine a system of overland travel that would come to symbolize the technological savvy and grand ambitions of the American people. As early as 1804, English and American inventors had experimented with steam engine technology to propel land vehicles overland. By 1836, 32 years later, more than 1,000 miles of railroad track had been laid across 11 states. By 1860, the Civil War, 27,000 miles of rail alone connected and stitched up the Northeast. Railroad construction required massive amounts of capital. Some came from private sources, but much of it came from the federal government in the form of land grants. It would be difficult to overstate the impact of the railways on American society. Where rail went down, towns, ranches, and farms grew up along the routes. Shipment time and travel were altered overnight. Travel time between New York and Chicago went from 3 weeks to less than 2 days. The rails were a breeding ground for technological advances, so key to the nation's economic growth. And railroad companies led the charge toward modern corporate forms of organization. Railroads became an emboldening symbol of the young country's technological prowess and its true economic potential. Before the telegraph, communication was entirely physical, which meant all long-distance communication relied on the mail, which traveled first on horseback and coach, and then on the rails. In 1832, an art professor named Samuel Finley Breese Morse began experimenting with pulses of electricity passing along an electrical wire. He developed a code representing the letters of the alphabet, and he got Congress to appropriate funding for a telegraph wire linking Baltimore and Washington along the rails. The first transmitted message was news of James K. Polk's presidential nomination in 1844. By 1861, 50,000 miles of wire connected most populated parts of the country all the way out to San Francisco, running mostly along those railroad lines and allowing for easy communication between stations. In 1866, the first transatlantic cable underneath the ocean was laid. Nearly all of the independent lines had joined into one collective organization called the Western Union Telegraph Company. Journalism, as you can imagine, changed overnight as the wire soon delivered even international news in a matter of hours, as opposed to weeks or even months. In 1846, newspaper publishers around the nation formed the Associated Press to promote cooperative news gathering by this wire. Even advances in the printing of traditional newspapers, the rotary press, made printing easier and allowed for mass circulation of now daily newspapers bringing the news from Europe to San Francisco the next day. Innovations in management, including the rapid shift from individual merchant capitalists to the development of American corporations, drove the United States toward a modern capitalist economy in the span of just a few decades. Between 1820 and 1840, laws began to permit a system of limited liability, LLC, in which individual stockholders risked losing only the value of their investments if an enterprise failed. They would not assume the debts, which encouraged private investment and helped make possible much larger manufacturing and business enterprises. During this ensuing economic boom of these early years of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, a large number of state banks issued competing banknotes in currency, creating rampant confusion and inviting counterfeiting. In response, Congress authorized a powerful Second Bank of the United States, which pressured state banks to adopt sound and similar banknotes. Congress also passed a tariff law after the War of 1812 that effectively limited competition from abroad. Meanwhile, debate over whether the federal government should finance roadways raged, while state governments and private enterprise were left on their own to build the transportation network America needed to expand. The most profound economic development in the middle of the 19th century was the rise of the factory system. Before the War of 1812, manufacturing took place within American households or maybe in small workshops. The factory system was perfected in places like Lowell's Textile Mills, Francis Cabot Lowell's Textile Mills. The factory system organized business operations under a single roof and moved manufacturing from the home into a concentrated and physical space. America's industries were developing rapidly by 1840 when the invention of machine tools, the principle of interchangeable parts, and the production of coal revolutionized the manufacturing industries. Coal, power. American inventors came to symbolize the ways in which technological innovation could produce major and positive economic growth that could ripple across the globe. Francis Cabot Lowell centralized textile factories into a vertical system that rapidly brought down consumer costs. Charles Goodyear discovered a method of vulcanizing rubber, and an entire rubber industry was born. Elias Howe constructed a sewing machine in 1846, and then Isaac Singer made improvements to it, and that invention has since saved billions of hours and billions of dollars, not to mention billions of sore fingers. Factories were forced to recruit laborers, sometimes entire farm families in their early days. Conditions were better than they would later become. Under the Waltham-Lowell system, for instance, young women were recruited, well-fed and supervised, and housed in clean boarding houses and dormitories to ensure a steady workforce for the mills. As competition among textile manufacturers increased, many of these mill girls, as they came to be known, gradually made their way to new occupations with relative freedom where they could choose where they wanted to live. And immigrants quickly became the majority of the factory workforce in the United States after 1840. Poorly paid construction gangs made up of increasingly Irish immigrants performed the heavy, unskilled work of turnpike, canal, and railroad building while living in shanty towns along the road. Factories began to pay a piece rate for piece work, rather than a daily wage to speed up production and incentivize work. Factories themselves are soon becoming larger, more unsanitary, more crowded, and generally more dangerous. The average workday stretched toward 14 hours, and women and children, whatever their skills and abilities, tended to earn less than men. The factory system I'm describing ended, in a sense, the artisanal system of the older Republican vision that Jefferson had imagined for the United States. What we nearly lost in the transition to the factory system was the possibility of economic independence that system had afforded skilled laborers. In response to this de-skilling of American labor, craft societies and mutual aid began to organize in trade unions. Hostile laws and courts handicapped the unions, as did the economic depression of the Van Buren era and the steady source of replacement labor coming from European shores every day. Workers tried to persuade state legislatures to pass laws setting a maximum of a 10-hour workday and regulating child labor. Workers tried to persuade state legislatures to pass laws setting a maximum of a 10-hour workday. Remember, it stretched toward 14 at this time. And they attempted to get state legislators to regulate child labor. But their greatest victory was achieved in the case of Commonwealth v. Hunt, which certified the legality of labor unions in the United States and permitted work stoppage or strikes as a lawful negotiation tactic. In 1840, white women bore an average of 6 children each, and the death rate in the States was dropping rapidly. German and Irish immigration, long choked off by the wars in Europe and economic problems in America, began in earnest. By 1850, almost half of the residents of New York City were first-generation immigrants. The growth of cities like New York and Boston exploded between 1840 and 1860 in the lead up to the Civil War. And the booming agricultural economy of the West, now being interconnected through the canal system, produced significant urban growth in places like St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Louisville, Kentucky. All of these cities became centers of growing trade that connected the farmers of the Midwest with New Orleans, and through it, the cities of the Northeast. After 1830, an increasing portion of this trade traveled through the Great Lakes, creating new port cities like Buffalo, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Chicago. Remember that Erie Canal. While foreign-born people outnumbered natives in northern cities like St. Louis and Milwaukee during this era, almost no immigrants would settle in the South. While Democrats courted the support of new immigrants, others viewed the growing foreign-born population with alarm. Charges of racial inferiority, job stealing, political extremism, and a disdain for the Catholic Church dominated the fears and prejudices of nativists, who created formal clubs and societies to combat the growing alien menace in the United States. Nativists. The Native American Party, for instance, joined with other nativist groups to form the Supreme Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, whose demands included barring Catholics from holding public office, enacting more restrictive naturalization laws, and establishing literacy tests for voting. The order adopted a strict code of secrecy, and their famous password was, "I know nothing." Ultimately, members of the society became known as the Know-Nothings and staged a political electoral movement that did well in the Northeast in 1854. I mentioned Catholics in there. One of the groups there, prejudiced against, are concerned about the allegiance of Catholics to the Pope in Rome and not the American president. And they took that name, Native Americans. We're not talking about American Indians. We're talking about older Protestant generations of Americans who've been here a while. They took that name, Native Americans. The Industrial Revolution had the undeniable effect of making the United States both dramatically wealthier and increasingly economically stratified. Slaves, Indians, landless farmers, and many unskilled workers in the fringes of the manufacturing industry saw their lives improve only marginally during these decades, while many merchants and industrialists accumulated vast fortunes. In large cities, people of wealth built mansions, they founded social clubs, and they drove showy carriages around places like Central Park, New York. A significant population of the impoverished also emerged in cities alongside the rich. The urban poor lived on the streets. Sometimes they became dependent on charity and crime or both for survival. Some of these paupers, as they came to be known, were recent immigrants, while some were widows and orphans, stripped of the family structures that allowed most working-class Americans to survive. Some were mentally ill, some were alcoholics. Still others, mostly Irish and African, were victims of native prejudice, shut out from all but the most menial forms of labor. Despite the widening gap between the wealthy and the poor in this era, there was relatively little overt class conflict in the United States. More prevalent than social mobility of this era was geographical mobility. From one industrial town to another, migrants moved their families looking for ever greater economic opportunities out west. The fastest growing group in antebellum, or pre-Civil War America, was the middle class. Once commerce and industry became a source of wealth, the rigid distinctions of old European society, that is landowning gentry versus landless peasants, found its end in America. People could prosper in the United States without owning land as long as they provided value and service to others. Middle-class women sometimes could afford to hire a house servant in this era, and middle-class families began to build and buy solid, moderately sized homes. Inventions like the cast iron stove changed the nature of housework and allowed for the improvement of the American diet. Stoves. The expansion and diversification of American agriculture and the ability of distant farmers to ship goods to urban markets by rail increased the variety of foods available to the average consumer in a city. As relative wealth grew, families began to share beds and bedrooms less often, and rooms became cluttered with furniture and other fine household goods among the American middle class. Some middle-class homes, few, but some had indoor plumbing and toilets by the 1850s, a significant advance in sanitation standards. And it became an aspirational goal of the middle class to keep their children in home or in school instead of out earning a wage, a concept known as romantic childhood. But just this notion of childhood, which is sort of novel, has its birth in the American middle class, a rebirth rather. Industrialization produced profound changes in the nature of the American family. At the heart of this transformation was the movement of families away from farms and toward urban areas and economic opportunity. Income earners were increasingly leaving their homes each morning to work in a shop or a mill or a factory, and the distinction between the public world of the workplace and the private world of the family first now emerged. In the new middle-class family of the industrial era, the husband was suddenly assumed to be the principal income earner, upending the co-equal economic spirit of covenanture, the custom that counts married couples as a single unit. The popular image of the American woman now shifted from that of contributor to the family economy to one of guardian of domestic virtue. Middle-class women learned to place a higher value on keeping an organized domestic sphere. Suddenly living very different lives from their husbands, American wives began to develop a distinctively female culture revealed in the romantic novels and the women's magazines of the era. This cult of domesticity, as it was sometimes called, provided women with a greater material comfort, but in many ways it cut them off from the external world. Some of the keenest observations of America in this antebellum era come from the famous French novelist Alexis de Tocqueville, who traveled the country for months as he wrote, noting the profound ways in which the formerly European peoples of the United States had changed in response to their new homeland. Tocqueville. The notion of separate spheres, as it came to be known, also displayed a distinctive class bias. Middle and upper classes reinforced their status by hiding their women from the harsh realities of wage labor. Women were to be mothers and educators, not partners in production. But lower class women continued to contribute directly to the household economy. The middle and upper class ideal was feasible only in households where women did not need to engage in paid labor. In poorer households, women engaged in wage labor as factory workers, piece workers producing items for market consumption, tavern and innkeepers, and domestic servants. A vibrant culture of public leisure emerged as work took people out of their homes and as these spheres took root. Leisure and relaxation were something to be seized in what free moments these Americans working 14 hours a day had. Men gravitated to taverns for drinking and talking after work, while women gathered in each other's homes for conversations and card games. For the educated, reading became a principal leisure activity, and books became staples of affluent homes. Theater attendance grew as performances increasingly crossed class lines. Minstrel shows, in which white actors wearing blackface ridiculed African-American culture, became popular in the United States, as did public sporting events, including horse racing, boxing, and cockfighting. Baseball, not yet formally organized, was beginning to attract small crowds, as did traveling circuses. Popular tastes of the American public tended toward the bizarre and the fantastic in this pre-war period. In the absence of film, television, and radio, Americans still hungered for visions of the unusual, the frightening, and the bizarre. P.T. Barnum's early freak show was populated by little people, Siamese twins, magicians, and ventriloquists long before he moderated his act. Lectures and the thirst for knowledge drove many Americans to churches and to auditoriums to hear the latest advances in science and descriptions of exotic places, vivid historical narratives, religious orations, and messages of social uplift and reform. Agriculture moved out of the Northeast with the development of railroads and the commercialization of the East Coast. In the Old Northwest, Chicago now emerged as the national center of the agricultural industry, leading the way in meat packing, flour milling, and in the distillation of whiskey. The stratification of wealth that afflicted the cities of the East Coast did not similarly poison the rest of the country. With the growth of factories and cities in the Northeast, the domestic market for farm goods increased dramatically in the years leading up to the Civil War. Strong economic relationships tied this Northwest to the Northeast, further increasing the isolation of the South within the Union. New agricultural science, including better varieties of seed and better breeds of animal, increased the quality of products, while the manufacture of steel plows by John Deere in Moline, Illinois, and the McCormick wheat reaper and thresher in Racine, Wisconsin, increased production, agricultural production overall. Life for farming people varied greatly from region to region. In the more densely populated agricultural areas, farmers made extensive use of the institutions of their communities: the churches, the schools, the stores, and the taverns. Religion drew farm communities together perhaps more than any other force. Even in areas with no organized churches, farm families gathered in one another's homes for prayer meetings, Bible readings, weddings, baptisms, and funerals. They often gathered to share tasks such as barn raising, crop harvesting, corn husking, and wheat threshing. Women came together to share domestic tasks and hold bees, in which women made quilts, baked goods, and made preserves. Despite the strength of their communities, rural families had much less contact with the popular culture and public life than the people who lived in towns and the cities out east. Most rural people treasured their links to the outside world, devouring the newspapers, magazines, and catalogs, advertising goods they'd never be able to see with their own eyes. And yet most also valued the relative autonomy that their farm life gave them, and many rural Americans look back nostalgically on country life once they moved to the cities, or if they moved to the cities. They ceded control over their agrarian patterns of their daily lives. This peaceable agricultural kingdom I'm describing, the old pastoral antebellum American Northwest, was the place that gave birth to Abraham Lincoln.